All right, let's begin. So my work is situated within what is referred to as tobacco-caused health inequities, right? So we can have health inequities for a whole bunch of reasons. And this is essentially those that are caused by tobacco. Scholars, you do know that tobacco use is a preventable cause of morbidity and mortality, right? We don't have to become sick or die from tobacco use, right? So it's one of the biggest things that we think critically about as we think about public health work. So as you know, what I love to do, I'm gonna introduce you to the critical aspect of my work by showing you this video. It's gonna move fast, so you should be paying attention as soon as I click this button, particularly this first part. And I'm gonna ask how many of you have actually seen, this is actually the beginning of this video is a truth campaign ad, and I wanna know how many of you have ever seen it, but it contextualizes all the work that I do. The ad you saw, I believe, came out what we refer to as pre-pandemic, so maybe 2019, maybe, but really highlighted the work that myself and a larger group of researchers do within tobacco control. And what I really want to share with you, scholars, is that we have moved from, in this case, we're moving from tobacco control into tobacco regulatory science. So what does that mean? The FDA now has regulatory authority over cigarette products, right? Didn't used to, right? That happened just a few years ago. Scientists like myself are trying to give the FDA scientific data to allow them to then control, right, the impetus or the power of the tobacco industry as it relates to marketing. And so this is really important as we think about what science does and the power of science. So I want you to keep that in mind. All right, I'm not going to show you the second video yet. So scholars, here is one infographic actually. This was a collaboration between APHA and the NAACP, where they were talking about living tobacco free. And I want you to think very critically about all the different aspects of ways in which you can do that, right? So making people aware of big tobacco is the tobacco industry, right? So this is what people don't think about. Large industries like the sugar industry, the tobacco industry, they have their own scientists, you get that? And they don't have the same regulatory authority. They don't have to go through all the processes we have to go through to get a grant funded, to go through IRB and treat the people that we work with, right, respectfully and ethically, right? They can get their research in and out. So we are often reacting to playing catch up. Does that make sense? Which makes our work a little bit more challenging. But big tobacco has a clear understanding of how to market. They are experts at marketing. They market women separately. They market all racial and ethnic groups separately. They now, right? They market based on sexual orientation. They know how to do that. Most smoker scholars, if you ask them the brand that they smoke, they believe that they made an individual choice to smoke that brand, right? And the honest truth is those are the brands that were marketed to them. Do you get that? And when they have that awakening, right, it changes their perspective on this disease we call addiction. This is really important. So as you heard in that video, 86% is more like almost 90% of self-identified black smokers smoke a menthol product. That's because that's what's marketed to them, right? So we're talking about Newport. Previous to Newport, the biggest one was Cool, right? Or Cools. Those are things that are really important. And those products were made specifically from research that the big tobacco had done with black communities, right? As a way to say, how would you get to use this product? Smoking a combustible product, scholars, is actually very harsh to your system. Menthol is one of the ways that makes it easier. So we want to think about those things. Now we have smoke-free campuses, smoke-free areas, smoke-free locations like restaurants and the like, but there are a multitude of ways in which we're trying to address tobacco at multiple levels. And I want to share with you, this is actually the title of a recent presentation that I gave with a colleague of mine, right? But how tobacco control has failed the black community in America, achieving health equity and embracing anti-racist research. So I literally gave this, okay, this month is November already. Can you believe that? How many of you can believe that? I gave this presentation the end of June, just so you all are aware, right? So the work that I'm going to share with you here, scholars, has been funded by the FDA and NIH. FDA may be the funder, but they use NIH's system for processing, right? So an R21 is a 2-year grant, and R01 is up to 5 years, just so you know. And then if you see P20, those are center grants, and those are always 5-year grants. So this work comes from there. So Brian King is the current director of the FDA, and he said in a report last year that among persons who smoke, progress hasn't been experienced equitably. Smoking disproportionately affects communities, including, but not limited to, those racial and ethnic populations, low-income populations, people living with mental health conditions, blah, blah, blah. Now, scholars, if we think about the intersection of that, right? What if your social location is multiple, right? What if you're Black and low income and you are trying to grapple with a mental health condition, right? So it exacerbates the issue in this way, right? So we know that that decrease that they talked about, which is true, if you look at overall, smoking rates in the last 2 decades have decreased substantially. I talked to you about changing the social norms in that way, but it hasn't been equitable in all communities. And so my work is focused on those communities where it hasn't been. And so if we think about it, why don't we see equitable impact, right? Scholars, still to this day, 45,000 Black folk die from tobacco-caused illness and disease. Still to this day, right? 85% of Black adults, 95% of Black youth smoke a menthol cigarette. I want you to think of it this way, scholars. Menthol was the first flavor introduced into a tobacco product, right? Now we got a whole host of flavors. And we'll move to, my work has moved from cigarette use to little cigar and cigarillo use, which we'll talk about in a second. And thus, Black youth and young adults are more likely to smoke cigarillos than their white peers, followed very quickly by those who self-identify as Hispanic. Yes?
How does like hookah and all of that play into this?
Great point. Currently, hookah is not regulated. Well, the FDA, we'll get into that. The FDA says they're going to regulate all flavored products. Hookah is not viewed as, it's viewed as an alternative tobacco product. I know. Yeah. I know. Hookah's huge, right?
I'm scared for them.
Hookah's huge, right? Scholars, this is just a graph showing as we think about health outcomes, right? If you think about a tree and its branches, but more importantly, its roots, right? Too often, as a health behavior, we have addressed smoking as a branch. What we need to do, scholars, is move down here to the root, right? Racism is here. This is where we need to be focused. Is that clear? So this is where this shift in the work that I do with a team of mine, this is where we're moving towards. So I have worked with a team of investigators for the last 10 years, and we have done several multi-site studies that I want to talk with you about. So how do we progress toward tobacco health equity? How do we begin to think about how can we dismantle systems of racism and oppression? So first, we need to acknowledge the historical context that racism has played in tobacco control and research. And we came up with 3 simple questions to ask. Who's doing it? Meaning the work. Who is being studied? And what is being studied is critically important. So scholars, if we want to clearly acknowledge the historical context, Black folk have been advertised tobacco products for decades, right? This ad is so old, the year is unknown, right? Actually unknown, but we know that this is a U.S. cigar ad, and both the brand manufacturer and the year is on. This is actually in Stanford, has a center focused solely on the historical context of ads, and this is part of their collection. But there has always been historical exploitation, right? So as we think about in the closest state to us, right, Virginia, right, as we think about tobacco industry brought immense economic growth to not only Virginia, but other states in the union, right? And as a result, it's one of the reasons the enslavement of people was made profitable, right? Because it's actually very costly to enslave someone. Take a lot of money to do that, right? But this is what made it profitable. Before World War II, advertisements, deeply racist imagery to appeal to white consumers. You can see my is sure am sweet tasting, right, as we think about slang or cultural text, as we think about the enslaved and their attempt to speak a new language, right? But if you think about the imagery, particularly as it relates to phenotypic characteristics and how racist those are. So this has been going on for years. But this is modern day exploitation, scholars, right? So the tobacco industry sells moods to the black community, right? Doing is smooth, right? That's a mood or a context. Does that make sense, right? This is Newport, this is Salem, this is cool. Of course, all of these are mentholated cigarettes, right? And even though you can have a warning, like here above this particular photo, these folks look like they're having a really good time, don't they? Mm-hmm. Right? Move down to that lower level those are Swisher Sweets. Swisher Sweets is a little cigar, cigarillo. They are most often flavored. This flavor is what, scholars? Can you see that under the word leaf? Honey, right? We know what honey means, right? You have a sense. Even if you've never used this product, you have a sense of what you would be expecting, right? But they've gotten very sophisticated, and we'll talk to you about some of these new flavors which aren't so evident of what they're selling. But also, scholars, modern day exploitation is our tobacco industries often present themselves as being responsible as a corporation, right? So here is Altria's celebration of Black History Month. I want you to think about that, right? Your company sells a product that we know disproportionately impacts both sickness and death in the community, and you want to celebrate Black history. But it's a way that they present to the public, you get it, that may be counter to what is actually bringing them funds, right? And they talked about how they have, in this particular ad, they said they've been celebrating Black history since 1933. Well, the most recent predatory tactic is this concept of corporate social responsibility. This is actually a ad that was placed on what was then Twitter. What do y'all call it now? X, I guess that's what you just call it. What was then called Twitter, right?
The site formerly known as Twitter.
Yes, the site formerly known as Twitter. This is actually from a tobacco company saying Black Lives Matter, and I don't know how this creeped me out. While we were silent, we were listening, right? This is the tobacco company saying, yeah, we were complicit, but we were listening. And so now these past weeks have been a wake-up call. And now we're optimistic about change. We're working to understand this is the sign by the president of Swisher. So to the public, they look as if they're connecting, right? Socially to what is happening. These are predatory tactics that are quite interesting. One of my colleagues who I work with actually responded to this particular text, and we got to get hate mail. Photos like this make me uncomfortable. But anyway, scholars, you see that's me, right? But that is my colleague, Dr. Kim Sterling, right? She is now at Rutgers. At the time of this particular study, she was at the University of Texas. Scholars, you all know what's happening in Florida and Texas, and you know that people are literally fleeing those states, right? She literally said, I can't do my work here. I got to move on, right? Is now at Rutgers University. So anyway, who is doing the research? I say this because it is critically important as we think about our own social locations and placing ourselves within them to do the work. How many of you have ever heard of a positionality statement, right? Often positionality statements, if you do qualitative research, you are trained to, qualitatively what we say is that there is no such thing as objectivity in research. It's always subjective. So in qualitative work, you put your social locations or your biases, right, or your perspectives up front, right? Quantitatively, we think it's very objective because it's an analysis of numbers, right? But scholars, racism can creep into those things as well. Here's a positionality statement my colleagues and I wrote for our most recent grant that just ended, right? So we said, before we present the findings of our collective research, in the spirit of self-reflexivity, we acknowledge our positions as highly educated African-American scientists, right? Recognizing that although we are fierce advocates for the health and well-being of Black and African American communities and other people of color, we have experiences with racism, sexism, and discrimination. And we also have some deeply held beliefs about the pervasiveness and toxicity, of both racism, power, and systemic oppression. But we also humbly acknowledge that our privilege and lived experience may not reflect those who participated in our work, right? We still have power that is unlike, right? There's still a power dynamic between us and those we engage in our work. So we want to acknowledge the influence of our individual and collective social locations that have on our research, putting that up front. We actually had a funder who said, this should be a requirement for every scientist. And scholars, that's exactly what we were saying. Let's now make it transparent. It should be what you read before you read an article. Yes, right? You want to know who is the scientist and who they are, how may that have influenced not only what they were investigating, scholars, but how they interpreted that data. Does that make sense? So we want to think about positionality statements as a way to make inroads into structural racism. Does that make sense? Thinking very clearly about how we do that. Next is, if we're conceptualizing and conducting the research, who is being studied? And we have positioned ourselves to study communities of color, particularly youth and young adults who self-identify as Black across the African diaspora. This is really important. And we wanted to stay right here. Why is this important? Scholars, because too often as scientists, we are put in positions where we have to chase funding. You get that? Our latest example is when COVID emerged. Scholars, every institution sent their scientists an email and said, how does your research relate to COVID? And people were pivoting to try, because what did they know was going to happen? There was going to be money for what? COVID. There was going to be money for COVID research. Now, I don't like to do what I refer to as ambulance chasing, right? That's not how I engage in research, right? I like to do community engaged work, and I want it to be much more organic in that processes. But scholars, we're talking about COVID was a respiratory illness. Were there individuals smoking during COVID, right? We know that lung cancer is a really in particular, right? So our work was directly, not indirectly, but directly connected. And so we added some questions regarding the impact of COVID on their ability. Was it shaping their ability to make a decision to smoke more, or even to quit? So this question is about why cigar research, scholars, and I want to tell you, you never know what one article can do. This article was actually a research letter. The author is Dr. Valerie Yerger, who is a self-identified Black naturalist who wrote this work, and this is what Dr. Sterling and I discovered. Dr. Sterling and I were in doctoral programs at the same time at different institutions, did not know one another. And when we first got together to say, hey, we should collaborate, we both referred to this letter. I was in the midst of writing my dissertation. This article changed my dissertation. Changed my dissertation when I read it. I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to do. So this is what was happening. Despite this predatory marketing, right? We were being pressured to not focus on Black youth. They were like, the rates aren't high. You should be over here working with this populations. When I say this, I'm talking about people who are vested in our interests, right? They want you to become a great scientist. They were like, don't study that population, study it over here because the rates are much higher. We kept saying, but that's not what I'm finding in my research. There are clearly Black youth who are being impacted in this particular way. Dr. Sterling was actually told by someone, you should give this up and think about studying another area in tobacco. But it also wasn't consistent with our lived experience, right? So scientists live in the world, right? And so we see and observe things that are very critical, right? So we know family members and friends, right? Black scholars is referred to as Black and Milds, right? You've heard of Black and Milds as a little cigarillo. But we also understand the advertising that was in our neighborhoods like ours. We know the advertising that was in Jet and Ebony magazine. Scholars, when this work first started, there were scientists, Black scientists, who went to Jet, Ebony, Essence, and said, stop advertising tobacco products in your magazines. You know what Jet, Ebony, and Essence said back? If you want Jet, Ebony, and Essence, we have to accept these ads. Who was the biggest donor to those magazines being published every month? the tobacco industry, right? These are things we have to think about, right? But it also wasn't consistent with published work, and this is the work of Dr. Yerger. So scholars, at the time we were doing this work, the Center for Tobacco Products, it was the only grant in their research portfolio at the time that was comprised of an all-black research team. It was myself, Dr. Sterling, and Dr. Fagan, right? They had never had, this is what they said to us, we wouldn't know that, right? They had never had an all-black research team. But here's more importantly where we work at too, scholars. So when we think about perceptions of combustible products, as you move from cigarettes to blunts, young people feel more harm is with cigarettes. They understand all the deleterious ingredients that are put into a cigarette. But everything, scholars, about marijuana is positive. It's Mother Earth. It's natural. It calms you down. Come on, y'all. Y'all have heard this before. This ain't new, right? It doesn't cause cancer. They will tell you about the medicinal marijuana movement and how popular that is, right? Then you can get all into CBD oils. Y'all get it, right? And so part of our work is to say, yeah, but if you're using a blunt, scholars, are you only smoking marijuana? Right? What is a blunt? It's the hollowing out of a tobacco product and you refill it with marijuana, but what is the leaf made of, right? If it's too cheap, it's just paper that they dyed brown, that they just dyed brown, right? But if it's a good cigar, it's actually tobacco leaf, right? So you have young people who are like, wait a minute, I never thought about it that way, right? You're still smoking tobacco. And so then finally, scholars, what is being studied? And so we are now situating our work specifically in flavored tobacco products, right? White Owls, Swisher Sweet, Philly Blunts, Black and Milds, these are some of the most popular. Regionally, if you change, some of these will change, but by and large, nationally, Black and Mild, Swisher Sweets, you will see a lot of Philly Blunts, older young adults, right? In this work, scholars, we have to go as far up. When we talk about young adults, we go all the way up to the age of 34 because of where the product is used, right? Really important. So I mentioned to you that often if a flavor is fruit flavor, right? We know what that is. You know what grape is, or you can expect what that is, right? Cherry and the like. Scholars, what do you think coastal cocktail is?
Probably tropical.
Maybe tropical, right? What do they have up there? They got kiwi, right? There's a peach in the drink, right? So you may think some fusion of that. There are literally, some of these flavors are called tropical fusion, right? But scholars, what if the flavor is jazz? Jazz as in the music, right? What are they selling you? A concept, right? It's a mood, right? What if the flavor is diamonds, right? You don't quite know, but this is what they're selling, scholars. If I'm selling you a diamond, a product that's flavored diamonds, I'm selling you luxury. You get that? You'd be shocked at the number of people who said, no, I buy this product because there's higher quality. Well, what makes it higher quality? Because, right, what they're being promoted. So now, scholars, the package in and of itself is marketing. This is where we have shifted. So this particular study, we did 4 waves of a longitudinal data set. So we yearly, actually we did it every 6 months. So we did it for 2 years, every 6 months, where we went in to the same group of young people, seeing what we're trying to see is change over time. In between every wave, we did online focus groups because we had to pivot due to COVID. So these were online focus group chats. And then we did what's called a volumetric choice experiment. And essentially in a VCE, you are forcing young people to choose one, what is the most important thing that made you buy this product? Is it the language and what it said? Is it the photo and what it presented? What about the package? We're trying to get to them. What made you say, no, this is the one I want versus this other one? It's called forced choice as a way to get them to do those things. So scholars, these are just some of our current publications. I'm actually working on the first paper from our qualitative work, those online focus group chats. You would be amazed at what young people have said about packaging. We segmented our online focus groups by race. So we have essentially a group of white, self-identified white smokers, self-identified black, self-identified Latino. We're trying to see if race matters. Because they were online, we were able to do it nationally, right? So imagine in a focus group, you got folks from California, but you also got folks from New York City. Very powerful in that way. Okay, I'm moving fast here because I don't have another day. Y'all like, this is it, Doc, this is all you got. Okay, now I want to talk with you, let me see here. Yeah, I want to talk with you about a few research examples. How many of you came to the talk with Dr. Pettaway? All right, I saw many of you there, right? Fascinating, particularly his infusion of creativity, right, with research, which we often don't think can happen. So we want to talk about it from this perspective. But this is what he gave us, right? First of all, this is probably one of the dopest PowerPoint backgrounds I've ever seen, right? When it first came up, I thought it was the cover. It's very busy, isn't it? And so this is what I said to him later. I was like, how do you get people to focus on what you're saying and they just not staring at, like I just kept staring at this, like trying to see different things. But here's something that I think is really important. So he highlights in these various colors things that are structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, or interpersonal, right? And so the pink is structural, the yellow is disciplinary, the light blue is hegemonic, right? So scholars, he looked at tenure track faculty at academic institutions nationwide. A little bit less than 6% identify as Black, a little more, but still less than 6%, identify as Latinx, and only 0.3% identify as Indigenous, right? If we look at editorial board scholars are the people who score or rate or review your articles, right? 77% white, 1% Black, 3.8% Latinx, 88% straight. So if we think about sexual orientation and race, right? What about all those other investigators in the system? And then we look at NIH grant review boards, mostly white, 11% come from underrepresented minority groups. NIH has a gazillion review boards, right? I'm on one now, right? There are multiple ones across all the different disciplines, but still only 11% in underrepresented minority groups. And that can include every other group but white. The premise here is who gets to make the decision what is what, scholars? What is science? What gets published? Remember we talked about the knowledge of production, particularly as we think about critical race theory. But then he shared with us this Y Heart PDX program that he has with youth. And this is what I found most important. He works with young people and then trains them in all of those courses so that they actually are not just collecting the data, but they're actually analyzing the data as well. And what he includes then is poetry and what he refers to as the decolonizing data hub, right? So he allows them to actually do the analysis, and then his job is to write it up to get it published. I want you to think about that, right? Trying to break into, intercede as we think about the current structures and the way that we produce science. So scholars, in the School of Public Health, there are 6 units. Behavioral and Community Health is my department, and also where I'm interim chair. Epidemiology and Biostatistics is another, family science. Health Policy and Management, Kinesiology, and then also Environmental Health. Our Environmental Health is an institute. It's going to be elevated to a department this year. They've been saying that for scholars. Yesterday, I've been at Maryland 13 years. Yesterday, November 1st, right? They've been saying that since I got here. Let's hope it happens within this academic year. So let's hope it happens by May. But they want to make sure that that becomes a department. I'm trying to show you some of the work coming from across the departments in the school in this particular manner. All right. So in my department, Behavioral and Community Health, we also have experts who are very interested in digital health and the impact of digital health, right? And so in this case, the question simply is, what is it, right? So it's just the use of information technologies, right, to prevent or manage a health condition. We know, scholars, that as soon as you say digital health, you have to add AI, don't you, right? And we know that racism can enter the algorithm, can it, right? People say, well, it's digital. There's no reason that it can be. No, racism can enter in any system, right? Particularly if it's humans who are creating the systems. Does that make sense? And so now there's a lot of conversation about, well, if we use AI to develop them, can we prevent racism being a part of those systems? And I'm not convinced that they are, right? So many of us wear wearable technology as it relates to digital health and what that may be. This particular scholar, Dr. Devlin Jackson, is interested in digital health, particularly as it relates to Black and Hispanic households, right? So this is what we know. Scholars, how many of you have ever had a doctor's appointment or with a healthcare provider that was via telehealth? All right. You know how often those have increased since COVID? Since COVID, we do. It's like all of a sudden we just acknowledge, right, we could do almost everything. Where before they were like, nope, can't do that, can't do that. We were forced to. And now many of you all don't want to go back, do you? You're like, give me the option of telehealth. To me is a little, I like telehealth appointments if it's after the physical visit. If it's a discussion about, so let's look over your lab results or let's do da-da-da-da. But I still feel like there are certain things where you need to be in person, right? Well, telehealth use was inconsistent among Black and Hispanic households, and we noticed from the general data, right? And this was even during the pandemic. Black adults were least engaged if it was for mental health. They did not engage in telehealth, right? Scholars, one of the biggest reasons for that may be what? If you're doing a telehealth appointment, what may it be?
Well, for telehealth, you have to have resources, like a laptop, but I feel like the Black community has the most disparities when it comes to mental health as well, because it's not as, I guess, I don't want to say culturally accepted, but, white folks are it's easier for them to like label something and then go to a psychiatrist and through their insurance. So it's just through money and status. So
There's a disconnect with the system, right?
Yeah.
So Black communities don't want to be labeled something by primarily white providers.
physicians.
Great point, yes.
I think you need time. You make time when you're sick. You don't make time when you're struggling.
That's another good point. But scholars, what is one of the first things if you're at home and your physician says we're going to have a telehealth appointment and you know what you're going to discuss, what may you need to participate in that? Yes.
Well, like for me, when I do telehealth, like I was able to do it just because my parents were helping me like provide the resources I needed. My mom called the doctor's office and asked, can she do the telehealth? It was all because like my parents helped set it up for me.
Great point. Yes, Haiti. You need the space. What particularly kind of space do you need, scholars? You need privacy. How many of you all would freak out if we said, hey, your doctor's going to call, you could do your telehealth appointment right here? You'd be like, wait, no, we not. They're not going to tell my stuff in front of this group, right? Even if it's your relatives.
They're the biggest problem.
Patient, right. But patient provider privilege, you want to be maintained even in a telehealth. Yes.
I was gonna say, so I do telehealth, and like one problem I generally have with like my psychiatrist is that the connection is not like always the best, because usually they're at home and then I'm at my house. So like for instance, last month I was supposed to have an appointment, and I got on the appointment to talk to my doctor, and like she couldn't hear me at all. So then I'm in the appointment and I have to reschedule the whole appointment.
Yeah.
And then I have to call my doctor's office because I'm trying to get a refund, but they're like, oh, we can't refund you because you went to the appointment. And then I had to explain to them, like, I didn't actually go to the appointment. Like, I showed up, but we didn't have the appointment. So they were like, oh, well, we'll just put that towards your next appointment.
There's a whole bunch of things they have to reconsider.
And sometimes, like, the links don't always work, because they might be home and they got things going on.
Yep.
So, yeah, telehealth has a lot of benefits. It's kind of convenient, but at the same time, if you don't have like good internet, which most African American communities do not have good internet access, which is something. My dad works in telecom, so I was like talking to him about that, and he was telling me that the cable companies specifically won't usually put high-speed internet cable in African American communities because they don't have the resources, and the time it would take to install it just doesn't make sense for them.
Yeah, it's about money, right?
It's a targeted effort, yeah.
Here and here, yes.
I think that there's just I think there's a lot of burnout in the mental health field. I was in therapy for like over a decade. It's a lot of just recycling through practitioners. So I think that telehealth has only allowed burnout to occur even more, especially, it's easier to have more clients via telehealth. And I just noticed, I actually had to fire my previous psychiatrist because he was just so like unprofessional and he just disorganized, and it just felt like my problems truly weren't being solved. Like I had asked to change my medication and he told me no, and then in that moment I was like, no, like I'm good. So it's just a matter of finding a psychiatrist or a doctor that matches, and then whether they can keep up with you.
Absolutely, I agree with that. There was a hand over here. No? Okay. Yeah, all of those things are really important, and I want you all to give thought to. I had, this is a couple of years ago. I had a doctor's appointment. My physician moved to a different location, and I'm in the patient room waiting on him to come in, and I can hear the patient and the physician in the next door, right? Not my physician, a different physician, different patient. When my doc walked in, I said, hey, y'all need to do something about the sound barrier, right? I heard everything. This is not. And I was like, and he was like, are you uncomfortable? I said, yeah, I'm uncomfortable. Now, mind you, he laughed like, it ain't like we saying much at all, and you're relatively healthy, you're this and that. I was uncomfortable that I could hear, right? There's no reason I should have been able to hear those things. Those are really important and can be barriers for people actually coming to seek help, right? What we know as we think about all health, right? Early diagnosis is key. Early treatment is key. And so if you create barriers, you now have people who are showing up and they have advanced stages of disease, right? Scholars, anytime somebody shows up and they're saying, oh, you have stage 4 something, and it's their first time, right? I will bet my career that there were a whole host of barriers that kept them from seeking the help. Also, we have individuals who only use the ER, right? How many of you have a PC? You have a primary care physician. That's who you go to on a routine basis, right? You should not be, you only use emergency services when it's an emergency. But that should not be who your doctor is, right? Oh, I broke my arm. Yeah, you may need to go to an emergency room, right, if you had an accident right then and there. But by and large, because you want to develop a relationship with that person over time so that you can seek the best care. And in this particular example, you begin to advocate for yourself. Those are things that we look for, particularly in public health. So anyway, older Black residents were less likely to use telehealth. Asian adults were least engaged. As you think about other digital health tools during the pandemic in general, wearable devices and accurately detect biomarker scholars, there are people who live and die by their wearable device. They think it's the most accurate thing that they have. And those are just indicators, right? It's indicators for you to go then get additional information. And then many of our digital health tools do not consider different language options beyond English. So in this case, as you all already pointed out, many reasons for the disconnections that I just shared with you happen to do with access to broadband or 5G, economic inequities, absence of technology at all in the home, limited consideration of intersectionality, right? Digital health literacy is really important, right? So you may have access, but you are not comprehending what that data is at all. What does it mean? Language preferences, and then of course what I mentioned, privacy concerns. But this is in the digital world, right? So this is what I said after our telehealth, my first telehealth meeting with my ophthalmologist, right? Who's my eye physician. I said, is this being recorded? No, it's not being recorded. Okay, so what happens when we end? Like, do you delete this? What happened? Where does it go? And she was like, oh, I forgot I was talking to a public health practitioner. And she was like, okay, here's her script. This is that, blah, 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 right? When she said, let me share my screen, I was like, that's your computer? Yeah, that's my computer. I just logged in. So I know my physicians are like, here come Craig, right? We got to deal with this, right? But scholars, have you ever had to get a shot of anything and the nurse walks in and it's already in the syringe? I'm like, I am so sorry. I wish I could have told you before you did, but I need you to bring me the bottle and then fill the syringe. I'll never forget this. I had a horrible plane ride. It was short, thank goodness, but it was a horrible plane ride. When I got off the plane, my back was hurting. Never had back issues, right? I was like, why is my back hurting? Turned out that my seat was actually broken. Only seat on the flight. This is literally what happened. I get on the plane, I'm boarding the plane, I get to my seat, there's a spring sticking out of the seat. I turn and look at the flight attendant and was like, hey, and she was like, yeah, we just recognize that, we're trying to get you a new cushion. They get the cushion, but the cushion doesn't fit that seat, so they literally press it down and duct tape it. And she said, sir, there is no other seat left on the flight. It's either you take this seat or we have to give you another flight. I was going to my frat brother's wedding, right? I was like, I got to get on this flight. So I get on the plane, I take the seat, and at first it was fine. It wasn't that long. It was a 2-hour flight. But when I got off, my back was killing me. And I was like, what is going on, right? So I get picked up by a friend, and they're like, what's wrong with you? I was like, my back is killing me. We go to another friend's house. This is my other frat brother. His wife happens to be a physician. This is what I said. Hey, my back is killing me. Do you have anything that would be legal? Scholars. Right. We ain't talking about nothing that'll be illegal, but do you have anything? They were like, oh, yeah. I can give you 800 mgs. Now, the only reason I did this was because this was a physician, right? I was like, are you sure? They were like, I'm positive. I took that and sat down, and I never moved. You know how you sit down and you be like, I'm not getting up unless the world is ending, right? I get to the hotel. This is what I say to my frat brother. I said, hey. We were leaving the next morning to drive, 2-hour drive to get to the next city to go to this wedding. And I said, here's the deal. I'm going to go to sleep. If I get up and my back is still hurting, you got to come get me and take me to the emergency room, because I can't sit in a 2-hour car ride to get to this wedding. I'm just not going to be able to go. He was like, okay. He said, so what time? I said, 6 a.m. I'm going to get up at 6. I get up at 6. My back is killing me. This is how I walked into the emergency room. I said, this is maybe why they do that. You know how they have those colorful tracks on the floor in the ER? I couldn't look up. I was literally like this. Like, I went straight to the desk. Beautiful nurse sitting there said, oh, baby, what is wrong? I said, my back. This is what I thought. I said, I got a slip disc. This is how much pain I was in. I was like, something's broke. She was like, let me get you in the room. She went straight in the room. They took my information while I was sitting in the room. I had to go get a MRI. I had to get all this stuff, right? All the stuff happens. I'm sitting in the room. The doctor was like, you have a constricted muscle. I was like, so this is misdiagnosis. There's no way a constricted muscle is causing this much pain. He said, you do know constricted muscles cause more pain than if you broke it. I was like, what? He shows me. I said, I need to see. He showed me the scan. He's probably like, kick this dude out of my ER, right? He showed me the scan. It literally looked like the muscle in my back. It looked like somebody, like, you know how you wring a towel? That's what it looked like. I said, okay, so what are you doing? He was like, we're going to give you a muscle relaxer. I said, great. So nurse comes in with the tray, has the syringe already filled. I was like, I need you to I need to see it. He was like, I'll be right back. He goes get the doc. The doc comes in. He was like, you're not going to let us help you. I said, I just want to see it. I'm not saying that they're trying to do something to me, but they could have made a mistake. I don't know what's in that thing, right? It all looks clear. He was like, let me show you. They literally walked me to the resource room. Muscle relaxer scholars and ERs come in big vats. They were like, so how are we? But they literally threw the syringe away. He showed me how, and I read the thing, and I was like, okay, I get this shot. Literally, I'm sitting there. He was like, stay here for 20 minutes. I'm getting dressed. I'm staying there for 20 minutes. I was like, okay, this is why drugs are too powerful, right? I felt like a new person. I was like, there is no way. So I said, well, what do I do? Like, this is going to wear off. He was like, no, it's not an anesthetic. He was like, it's releasing your muscle. He was like, you're not driving, are you? I said, no, I'm not the one driving. But I couldn't believe that that's all it took in the pain that I was in, right? Now you see that process, and I was able to get to the wedding and enjoyed the wedding and didn't have any problems. What if I didn't have health insurance? What if I wasn't advocating? You know, some people be like, yeah, I got back pain. I just got back pain. Right? They just deal with it, right? These are all things that we want to think about. Digital health is saying, if you have a tool that is yours, that you wear and utilize every day, how can it facilitate you having better health outcomes? That's what they're looking for. So in this case, Dr. Jackson is saying she wants to use CBPR and what is referred to as a culture-centered approach. This is an actual framework for the work that she does as we think about how we address sociocultural factors that may impact the use of digital health tools, and have communities of color help you develop what those look like. And they started that process in a new app. So this is quite interesting. She's a good friend of mine and a colleague, and I'm always saying stuff to her like this: you better make sure racism is not in that app. You might as well stop doing the work if racism gets in that app. So people are literally like, okay, how do you stop racism from getting in the app? You have to become anti-racist. Do you get that, right? As you think about the development of your work. But these are some of the things that we do in the School of Public Health as it relates to research. This is Dr. Jackson. One of the reasons why I asked them, this was funny. I was like, hey, send me a couple of your slides. I'm going to interpret them. They're like, you're going to interpret them? I'm like, yeah, I know enough to talk about them. But it's really important that we see scientists, yes, scholars, right? People need to see when you're promoting your work, they need to not see you, but they need to see you in all other spaces. Okay, scholars, when you use Google Slides, you can't have a whole lot of fancy stuff, boy, because it'll fill up on you. All right, scholars, this looks complicated, but I'm gonna break it down for you. Here's an article with a investigator in the School of Public Health that worked with us in the Center for Health Equity. Title says, occupational exposures to phthalates among Black and Latino U.S. hairdressers serving an ethnically diverse clientele, a pilot study, right? So the senior scientist was Dr. Kurosakala Lesliam, and she is in environmental health. And what she's very interested in is are Black and Latina stylists disproportionately impacted with potentially cancer-causing agents because of where they work and what they do. Does that make sense? And so what they found, scholars, is that stylists that do particular services, right, like permanent waves or texturizing, chemical straightening and relaxing, bleaching, permanent hair color, what is called the Brazilian blowout or keratin treatments, right? I don't have no hair, so I don't know what, right? But you got to tell me what those things are, right? But they are more likely exposed to these occupational hazards. And what they wanted to do in this particular study was to make the stylists aware of that, right? So think very critically about the products you're using and how you create. Have you ever walked into a barbershop or beauty salon and it's a little cloudy or hazy from the spray of stuff, right? It may smell good, because I often think they smell really good, but I'm often like, is there any, right? Is there any impact, negative impact that this may be having on our health? But if you do that every day on a daily basis and are inhaling those things, this was quite interesting. And so with this group of stylists, they then developed with Dr. Kurosakala a infographic to make stylists more aware and then think about alternative products to use with their clientele. Interesting, isn't it? Even if this ain't what we do, very interesting as we think about how are we, so in this case, scholars, this would be institutional, right? We're trying to intervene at the level of the actual location. All right. I was highlighting who the scientist was. Oh, and then this was also, I want to point this out. This was very interesting about this work. They compared stylists to general office workers to see. And of course, there were higher. The comparison group were office workers. There were much higher, what they refer to as MEP levels for the stylists who work in these particular instances. What was quite interesting, I actually went to a presentation where she had many of the stylists there. So these are both self-identified Black, Latina as well, primarily Dominican, right? Dominican shops are, their clientele is actually quite cultural, but often includes Black women, right? Because they like what is referred to as the Brazilian blowout and that sort of thing, right? What is interesting is when they were there and part of the presentation, they thanked Leslium for making them aware, but this is what they said. Somebody actually cared what we are, because they don't control, who controls the product that is being used in the shop? The shop owner, maybe not the stylist, right? You're renting a booth or a space, but also the customer. You know, customers will say in a minute, don't you put that in my head, right? My girlfriend brings her own shampoo when I think it's the same. I'm like,
Wow.
she was like, no, I only want them. So this is me. Wash your own head, right? They very pretty, but this is not a gender-based thing. I will tell you, brothers in the barbershop will only let certain people touch their head.
Yeah.
Right? They don't have multiple barbers. They got one barber. And if that barber is not available, then I'm just not going to get anything done, right? We are very particular about hair. Scholars, hair is multi-billion-dollar business. Yes.
Especially when you like had experiences where people mess your hair. you get
Right.
like real particular about like who does your
Right.
hair.
It doesn't matter if it's a natural shop, if it's not a natural shop, people are very particular about their hair. Yes.
I'm curious about the study. If you didn't have like a reference for it, compared to an office space, what would you use? If I had an office space, it's kind of relevant, but how relevant would it be to your personal life?
That would be great. So, and you know what it is? So this is the next part of the study. So they wanted to, the next phase of the study, they wanted to compare Black and Latina stylists with white stylists, right? To see if there was a difference. And that would get to the product. But what they quickly moved to? Let's just analyze the products themselves, right? So now they're trying to work with the consumers. So these are all things that I had to learn. So you know there are conventions around hair where people purchase hair and they purchase the products. So they're trying to get the owners of those products or the companies that create them to think very critically about what those are. Fantastic question. But you're right. I think the ultimate, if we were doing a randomized control trial, we need to compare it to other stylists. Absolutely.
I think there's a huge difference because the Paul Mitchell School,
Yes.
a lot that attracts a lot of white people
Mhm.
because it pertains to white people. They teach like makeup, nails, and hair, but a lot of younger white women, they come out of school and they go to Paul Mitchell, and it's kind of a cult. Like it is. No, it really is.
The way that they were trained.
I have heard it's like everyone's very catty and it's really bad, but they just promote one product, and it's Paul Mitchell. So like, in white salons, you'll see the same products like Paul Mitchell, Redken, Tresemme. So there's definitely a big cultural difference.
It's a major cultural difference. And if you've ever, I don't know if how many of you have ever been in a natural shop, right? So they only do natural hair. So there's no perms, or the products are quite different, right? And it smells good too, but it smells good in a different way, right? But it's quite interesting. I remember of course I'm bald now, but I remember the first time I went to a natural shop to get my head cut, right? And I was like, yeah, I've been missing out. And they were like, this is where you come because we're going to treat your skin, right? We're not treating just, right? So it's a framework that is quite different. So you can think very critically. If you're doing a scientific study, you need to treat those conditions differently, right? Those would be the natural comparisons. Yes, Sam.
I remember, like, when I was a kid, my mother, she used to go to the salon in D.C. So it was like, and then, like, when I was younger, too, I used to go to, like, hair cuttery.
Yeah.
Or whatever, but then as I got older, I started going to, like, more black barber shops because my mom, she would always get mad that they wouldn't, like line my hair up the right way, and so she'd get like real upset, and so she was like, you're not going to a white barber anymore. And so like now when I get my hair cut, well, I don't get my hair cut. If I get my beard trimmed or something, I only go to like black barber shops or Dominican barber shops.
Yeah.
Like specifically.
Yeah. And it depends on where you are. Like I learned about the Dominican shops when I lived in New York City. They're huge, right? And the clientele, particularly black women being a part of that clientele. So part of that is the service, but it's also price, right? Those things are quite expensive, right? And so people pay attention to hair cutlery and some of the other places, right? What they're promoting is you can get a a quality cut with in a quick, short period of time with the least amount of money, right? I don't know any Black-owned barbershop or salon that will tell you you're going to get in and out in 15 minutes.
No, not at all.
To them, that is disconnect to quality.
Yeah.
They all go work at hair cutter, the Paul Mitchell girls, or like, you know, those corporate salons.
Yeah.
They're
like, people are like, I don't want you to only spend 15 minutes. Right. They think that the quality is much less. Yeah. All right. How many of you, I know you all are taking this course, how many of you are definitely going to go through the entire anti-Black racism minor? This is not just a course for you getting a minor. Okay, glad to hear that. So as you know, you have this course, right? And then ultimately you will have a second required course based on the school you're in. And then you have 3 electives, right? You can take those 3 electives across the other 5 schools. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 electives and a capstone. You can take those other 2 electives across any of the 5 participating schools, right? So y'all can come over to public health and take I want to highlight for you some of the potential electives you could take, right? So this is Dr. Jennifer Roberts. She's in kinesiology. Her studies are about the built environment. She's very interested in how the built environment and inequities within the built environment impact health and well-being. Let me see, what's missing on this slide? Oh, you can't see it here because I transferred it from PowerPoint. But here's what she's trying to say. She's saying the earth that she's made of are these parks in these different areas, right? So at one point, she grew up in Buffalo. That's where Delaware Park is, right? She went to undergrad at Brown, so she used to run on the Roger Williams Trail, so Providence, Rhode Island. Then she lived in Atlanta when she was getting her master's degree, so Stone Martin Park, right? Then she worked in Oakland, California, right, for some time, and then worked in Elmhurst, Illinois, and then of course currently lives in Baltimore, right? So she's talking about how these experiences in the built environment have shaped who she is or the earth that she's a part of, right? So one of the courses that you could potentially have as an elective is called Black Bodies in Green Spaces from 1619 to today. And she talks very critically about how the outside world, right, if you think about nature and space and how it is constructed in a racist way. So the very quick example would be, do you remember the incident during the height of COVID with the black bird watcher in Central Park? Mm-hmm. And the self-identified white woman who was walking her dog and self-identified black man watching birds in the park. And when they came into the space that he was in, far apart initially, he just said, "Ma'am, can you leash your dog?" Because the rules in Central Park is if you're with your dog, it has to be on a leash, right? And how she then responded with, "Leave me alone, you don't tell me what to do, my dog is not bothering you," and then said, "I'm calling the cops." And I'm gonna say, and when she called, she said, "There's this black man harassing me in the park." You get it, right? So she uses that as an example to think very critically about who owns space, if we think about nature broadly, and how does racism then enter that space, and then what impact can that potentially have on health and well-being. But one of the examples, right? But she talks about it from antebellum South, particularly during enslavement, and then she brings it all the way through the Central Park bird watcher, who you all now know works at I think they worked at the Smithsonian now, the gentleman who's a bird watcher. She's also a nature activist, and so one of the, I love this, right? So this is what I love about research, right? So there are many entities, diverse groups or funding opportunities. She got funded by REI. You know REI, the big nature organization. You know, you go there for camping, hunting, biking, whatever it may be. She got funded by REI to create her own center. And her new center is called the Wakasa Earth Center. Wakasa actually originates in African languages, and it means born during harvest time. She says she thought of her grandmother when she was trying to come up with the name of her Earth Center. So anyway, part of this collaborative effort is that she wants to think very critically about how do we reintroduce the built environment and space to Black communities for them to understand that It's not about inclusion, it's about belonging. That you help create these spaces and thus you actually belong. So she does a lot of anti-racism activism through her work and scholarship. And so if you're interested, this would be one of the particular courses you could take. Another one is by Dr. Ron Mower. I don't have a photo of Dr. Mower, but Dr. Mower presents as a white male. He is teaching a course in kinesiology, Hoop Dreams, Black Masculinity and Sport. Dr. Schneider knows this. He came to me and said, why wasn't my class included? He was like, I got to get part of, I got to become. He was so excited about this minor and this concept. And I said, the only reason it wasn't included is that I didn't see it on the list, right? And so we did a quick review of the syllabus, and this is now an option, scholars, for you. One of the things that he thinks very critically about in his work is the practice of anti-racist dialogic pedagogy. And so he does self-reflexive analysis with students in the course along these lines of thinking about how do we do collaborative trust building for racial stamina. And so often he wants to use sports as the vehicle to get people to think very critically about this work. So his point is he uses sport as a window to examine history of racial hierarchy, and power and oppression, and then the contemporary state of race relations in America. And so what he gets students to do in his course is to listen, share, and build trust with their peers. They do what is called face-to-face scenarios as a way to have dialogue. Remember, I started out my 2-week time with you saying, as a nation, we've never had a national conversation about racism. We may have had debates, or you hear two different sides of the perspective, but we've never had a real conversation. This is what he tries to accomplish in his class. These are some of the quotes from some of the students who have taken the class before, but more importantly, his ability to then publish from this work, right? So this citation at the bottom is titled "On the Subject of Race and Sport, COVID-19, Zoom, and the Necessity of Anti-Racist Dialogic Pedagogy." There's actually a chapter in a book called "Sport and Physical Culture in Global Pandemic Times." A lot of work in this regard. But here is his overarching anti-racist and intersectional social justice framing. Again, this is kinesiology in the School of Public Health, another potential elective if you're interested in that. And then finally, scholars, as I said to you before, have a diverse number of scientists and scholars that you are citing. I love the work of Bell Hooks. I just love how she writes. I wish I could write like that in some ways, right? But she says something to me that's really important, particularly as we think about meaningful community. And she says, dominator culture has tried to keep us all afraid, to make us choose safety instead of risk, sameness instead of diversity, right? Remember, I kept saying we can't be fearful, right? We need to be strategic and thoughtful and holistic in our approaches, but we can't be fearful. So moving through that fear, finding out what connects us, reveling in our differences, this is the process that brings us closer, that gives us a world of shared values of meaningful community. Scholars, diversity is not a negative thing. Even having different racial identities is not a negative thing. It's the negative attributes called racism that we associate. That's the issue. We should celebrate diversity. We don't want a monolithic community, right? But the one way to celebrate diversity is that you ensure that you have full inclusion in that way. Scholars, it was my pleasure. I'm gonna try to take over the class the next time they do it. 2 weeks is not enough.